and in Philadelphia in the summer of 1787, and it appeared that they were actually throwing out the Articles of Confederation and creating a whole new constitution. And we were even more excited when we learned that the outline of this constitution was very much based on the Massachusetts state constitution, of which my husband was the principal author, in which there were established 3 separate branches of government: a bicameral legislature, a strong executive branch, and an independent judiciary, with checks and balances, so that power could not reside too completely in any one branch. So we were very excited to be returning home in 1788 with this new government to be formed under this new constitution, and then another blow. We discover on arrival that this country has now fallen apart into factions over whether or not to ratify this new constitution. We couldn't believe it. There were Federalists who supported ratification and Anti-Federalists who opposed it. And even more amazing, some of our oldest political friends, such as Thomas Jefferson, our friends Mercy Otis and James Warren in Massachusetts, even my husband's cousin, Samuel Adams, the man who almost single-handedly got this revolution going, he too. They were all anti-federalists. We could not imagine how anyone could feel that way. And now, we were now separated from some of our oldest friends by politics. Thanks to Providence for the august presence of General Washington, who was able, because of the great respect that people from all quarters held for him personally, that he could fill the role of chief executive under that very first election, that very first administration. And believe me, every time President Washington had a cold or a little fever, my husband and I were the very first ones to be praying for his speedy recovery, because we could not imagine how my poor husband would possibly fill those shoes at that point. It was such a difficult beginning. But still, we were not quite yet a nation. That first administration seemed very full of promise, wonderful leadership. Thomas Jefferson as Secretary of State, Alexander Hamilton as Secretary of the Treasury. It seemed like everything was going in the right direction. And then came the French Revolution. I think most of you look a bit too young to remember the French Revolution, as I do. I think I shall have to refresh your memories. Well, the French Revolution, of course, started in 1789, and we were very thrilled at first to hear the news that, because France was our first ally, and we were very excited with the idea that the ideas of democracy and liberty of our revolution had moved over to this very absolute monarchy over there. And from my 9 months in France, seeing the tremendous wealth of the aristocracy and the abject poverty of the peasants, it clearly was a society ripe for revolution. But within a short time, this revolution unleashed such destructive forces in their society, where the streets were literally running with blood and people were being guillotined by the hundreds, and they beheaded their king and queen. And within a few years, when they were being run by this 5-man directory with Napoleon Bonaparte at the head of their army, they were now invading countries all over Europe. Europe was in an all-out war, and they had declared war against England and seemed to be about to invade England. And here, this split this country into 2 very separate parties who were at war with each other, with the Federalist Party, particularly the branch, not so much my husband's part of it, but the part led by Alexander Hamilton, the High Federalists, as we called them, who were very much supporting England and wanted to go to war with France. And by the way, you know, Hamilton wanted to put himself at the head of an American army, and personally, I think he wanted to be the Napoleon of America, but I tried to keep my mouth shut about that one. At any rate, meanwhile, Jefferson was at the head of the Republican Party, who would support France at all costs and wanted to go to war against England. Now, at that time, France was in an undeclared war against us. She was sinking our ships at sea. She was impressing our sailors, seizing the cargo. My husband's entire presidency was taken up with the crisis of this issue of whether or not to go to war against France. And here in our own country, factions were so diametrically opposed that in a city like Philadelphia, where there were many on both sides, and people would wear cockades, whether they supported France would be one color and England would be another, and there would be battles on the streets in the towns and cities right here in America. And it really looked like we would be drawn into this European conflict. And again, once we were defeated militarily, which of course we would be because we were so weak at that time, the ruler, the one who won, the victor, would go the spoils. And they would carve up all of these resources that they still were itching to get their hands on once again. Well, my husband knew that if we entered a war in Europe now, we would surely lose. And so